Hi guys, Dr. Rob Barrington here with some more nutrition advice. I'd like to talk today about cereal grains and the difference between refined and unrefined grains, and how both refined and unrefined grains can be advantageous for particular reasons. What is a cereal grain? Well, a cereal grain is a seed of a grass. So we're talking about oats, we're talking about wheat, we're talking about rice, we're talking about corn. We eat cereal grains in huge amounts. There is evidence that cereal grains are necessary for the formation of civilization. Agriculture relies on the production of cereal grains in order to be able to feed growing populations. So nutritionally, cereal grains are very important. Now, what is the anatomy of a cereal grain? Well, if we look at a cross-section of a cereal grain, what we see is there is an outer layer called the bran, and the bran contains most of the nutrients, including the fibre and the micronutrients. Inside the bran, there is the endosperm, which contains mainly carbohydrate, which is in the form of starch, and protein. And then inside the endosperm, against the bran, off to one side, you usually get a germ layer. And the germ layer is the layer that gives rise to the new plant from the seed. So it allows growth from the seed. The endosperm tends to be the nutrients that allow the germ to grow. Now, when we refine grains, we take away the bran layer and we take away the germ layer to leave just the starchy endosperm. Now, this has an advantage for the food industry, because when we remove the bran and when we remove the germ layers from a cereal grain, we increase the shelf life considerably. However, although there's an advantage for the food industry, there's a disadvantage for human health, because there's a lot of evidence that refined cereal grains are a cause of disease. Now, if we go back a couple of hundred years and we look at history and historical records, we see that we know there was outbreaks of deficiency diseases, vitamin deficiency diseases, because of the use of refined cereal grains. In particular, when rice is polished, in other words, when the bran and the germ layers are removed to leave just the endosperm of the rice, most of the thiamine in the rice grain is removed, and this was a cause historically of beriberi in populations that relied on polished rice. It took many years and many years of investigation to understand that the bran layer and the germ layer of the rice contained a vitamin that we needed, and if we ate the polished rice, we developed the deficiency disease beriberi. So historically, refined grains have caused disease. Now, if we look at the cereal grains that are on sale in a supermarket and the products that are made from cereal grains, we find that the vast majority of them are in their refined state. They've had their bran layer and their germ layers removed, they've had their fibre removed, they've had their micronutrients removed, and so in essence what you are consuming is just starch with a small amount of protein. Now, this is problematic for human health because the fibre is required to maintain a normal glycemic response to food. In other words, fibre has a beneficial effect on blood sugar. If we remove the fibre from cereal grains, we have a problem with our blood sugar after we have consumed carbohydrates. This can cause an overload syndrome in the liver, and this increases the amount of carbohydrates that will pass down the de novo lipogenesis pathway. This produces fatty acids. These fatty acids interfere with the insulin receptor, and the end result is insulin resistance. Now, some interesting studies have been done on refined and whole grains, and there was one particular study for a number of weeks. A group of people were fed whole grains, and then for another number of weeks, the same amount of weeks, they were fed refined grains. Then they went back to whole grains, then they went back to refined grains, etc. Every time they consumed refined grains, their insulin resistance increased. In other words, their insulin sensitivity decreased. And every time they went through a period where they consumed whole grains, their insulin sensitivity improved. So this shows the importance of whole grains for correct function of insulin and for correct maintenance of blood sugar. So for human health, generally, refined grains are actually detrimental. For the food industry, they're great because they increase shelf life. Now, most refined grains have some vitamins and minerals put back into them during the processing, for the simple fact that they know that refined grains cause vitamin and mineral deficiencies. So there are vitamins and minerals added, for example, to refined breakfast cereals, even polished rice, and some of the refined grains that you can buy for cooking will have vitamins and minerals added in order to be able to prevent these deficiency diseases. But the amount of vitamins that are added back to these refined grains is never as many as is taken out during the processing. So they are devoid of micronutrients and fibre compared to the original whole grain. Now, there is one period of time where refined grains can be advantageous for human health, and that is after a workout. If you train hard, if you perform particularly resistance training and you deplete your muscles of glycogen, your body then has a need for starch, and it needs that starch very rapidly. If you consume refined grains during this period, the starch doesn't actually overload the liver with nutrients, because the liver and the skeletal muscles are desperate for glucose, and eating refined grains in this period can actually increase the resynthesis of glycogen, actually increase recovery rates. As long as refined grains aren't eaten too much, therefore they do have a place in human nutrition, but only if you're consuming them after you've trained intensely. The amount of refined grains that you can get away with eating before it will affect your health will depend on how long you've trained for and how intensely, and therefore how much muscle glycogen you've depleted. Somebody, for example, who is on the Tour de France and is cycling all day at a very high intensity would be able to consume refined grains probably all the way through the evening, and they would simply be using those the resultant glucose to resynthesize their glycogen. Somebody who trains very lightly would only be able to consume a small amount of refined grains before they started having this detrimental effect on blood sugar. So refined grains have a place in human nutrition, but you have to be very careful how much you eat. You have to generally base your diet around whole grains, because that is the way that you prevent detrimental effects to your blood sugar, and these detrimental effects on your blood sugar are now thought to be primary drivers of diseases such as type 2 diabetes, such as obesity, and such as cardiovascular disease.